Through song we pray, through dance we think of our loved ones. We wish for good health and happiness. May we live in peace and harmony.
Well, good afternoon, Indian Country, our friends in Alaska. It's a snowy 2022 in many, many parts of the country, and we're glad that you're snuggling in here to talk about where we stand with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's still with us 2+ years into the pandemic. A lot of the headlines say, well, infections are dropping, the rates are dropping. That's what a lot of the headlines are saying. But the reality is the pandemic is here. The variants continue to adapt and change in response. That's what viruses do, right? And because of our vulnerable ones, we know Native people have higher rates of chronic disease. Lots of challenges sometimes with poverty and income and ways of life, right, that have been put on people, and it's a challenge, right? And so masking up continues to be part of the equation here, and getting vaccinated. But we're here to talk about this. David Cournoyer is my name. I'm a member of the Rosebud Sioux tribe. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a snowy day here where I'm based in Minnesota, and we really appreciate that music from Shantae Standing Rock over the miles and up into the southeast Alaska, through south central in the 5 regions of the state. We're going to focus a little bit today on Alaska, but what this pandemic is about really applies to all of Indian Country. This is part of the We Can Do This Indian Country campaign. We Can Do This. And it's sponsored by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and partners like the Indian Health Service. It's been a lot of work, right? There's a lot of folks that are kind of tired of it, right? People don't want to wear their masks anymore. People don't want to talk about it anymore. People want spring to come. All of that, yes. But how do we stay vigilant, right? And how do we keep having conversations with people who may not agree with a lot of what they're hearing in the news, right? A lot of our relatives and family members may have different opinions. How do we have conversations with them? So, this is part of the We Can Do This Indian Country campaign. And our radio web hosts for this are Native Roots Radio, also based in Minnesota, Robert Pilot, and his very able boss, Emma Needham. Thank you to both of them for making this pretty seamless. And G&G Advertising is the subcontractor under the Department of Health and Human Services, which has developed a number of messages and spots targeting Alaska Natives and American Indians. And I want to play just a little snippet of one of those spots just to give you a sense of some of these culturally appropriate messages that really sound like people you know. And that's what we hope this conversation is today, too, right? Just a familiar conversation with family and relatives talking about an ongoing challenge. So here's a little bit from the campaign, We Can Do This Indian Country.
Do you know I love you so, and mommy will never let you go. To the stars and the sky, you'll always be mommy's little guy. Hey oh, hey oh, hey oh.
We Can Do This Indian Country. Greetings across Indian Country from California, Minnesota, Upper Plains, down to Oklahoma, the Southwest, and to our friends in Alaska. It's been a long winter. Just a couple weeks ago, I saw a little snippet that up on the North Slope, they were having the return of the sun ceremony. Can you imagine, right? Weeks and weeks and weeks with very, very little sunlight. But this is the time for storytelling, right? The time for winter activities. And things are starting to bloom, right? When you look around the country, things are starting to green up a little bit. And it seems like it's been a long winter, and it's certainly time uh, to start anew, right? To start anew, to prepare for summer and to prepare for the growing season and a whole new ceremonial cycle. Well, I want to bring in our first speaker, and we're so grateful to have Dr. Matthew Clark join us. He is the Alaska Chief Medical Officer, and he's also the chair of the National Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee, which I believe is a fancy way of saying the COVID vaccine task force, Doctor. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
Thank you, sir. I'm doing well. How are you?
Very good. We really appreciate your valuable time. I think one thing that we've experienced with having health practitioners in a series of these conversations, right, is just how just run people have been, and often not even having time to really sit here and think about some of the questions like, how are you? How are your colleagues, right? Have you had a chance to breathe a little bit, right? Because it's been just constant. And I don't know how, your training didn't prepare you for this, did it?
It certainly didn't. I'm not sure that many folks were fully prepared for what we've been dealing with over the last couple of years.
What is the state of the pandemic now in Alaska, Dr. Clark?
The COVID pandemic has taken an enormous toll on Alaska Natives and American Indian communities. Like the rest of the country, the Omicron variant has been dominant in Alaska since late last year. The Omicron surge peaked in Alaska in mid-January and fortunately has declined significantly since that time, including test positivity rates and COVID-related hospitalizations. Similar to prior variants, trends in COVID-related deaths tend to lag case and hospitalization trends, but those are also beginning to plateau in Alaska as well.
The CDC a couple weeks ago notified us, right, that the death rate in the American Indian Alaska Native community population had passed 10,000 folks. This was as of probably late January, so we got that news a couple weeks ago. 10,000 deaths from COVID or COVID complications. I think those numbers, right, when you hear approaching 1 million, right, for the total population, it's easy to see those numbers and not really think about them at that, macro level, if you will. But when you've had to treat patients and when you've had to have patients Facebook their relatives to say goodbye because they're not allowed to visit in the hospital, it sure takes a toll. Um, how do you keep our guard up, right, Dr. Clark? Given the fact that this isn't stopping, it's not over, it's not cured.
Right. I think it's an important perspective. I mean, first of all, we reflect on the many lives that we've lost over the last 2 years to this disease and to the pandemic. I've lost beloved patients that I've cared for many years due to COVID. We think about children growing up without parents and grandparents that otherwise would have been there except for COVID and the pandemic. And as you said in your introductory comments, it has been very challenging. I think a lot of people are tired of dealing with this. But I'm a naturally hopeful person. I have hope for the future. I do think that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. And I think that the important thing right now is that we recognize the fact that we have some tools that we can use to combat the pandemic, tools that didn't necessarily exist in the early stages of the pandemic. So as a hopeful person, realizing that we will get through this, I reflect on the importance of staying the course, and most importantly, ensuring that folks stay up to date on their vaccinations.
We can talk about the vaccines in a minute, but tell us about some of those tools. The whole process, right, of science coming up with vaccines, and the pharmaceutical industry and the researchers and the brilliant minds, right, behind them coming up now with treatments. It's almost a shame, right? This country is so concerned, rightly so, right? We're concerned often that things aren't, we're not as strong, and things aren't where they used to be in terms of America, right, being this leader in the world. And yet look at the vaccines and look at the science and the response to COVID. It's really been a really amazing process, right, that America has shown its intellectual and innovation might. And it's just a shame sometimes that we can't celebrate that and have something really to say, hey, look, we've done it. And in many respects, no one else did and no one else can. Tell us about some of these other things you were talking about.
Right. So when I think of the tools in our toolbox right now that we have to combat the pandemic, I think of three things. So there are public health measures, there are vaccines, and then there are medications, so-called COVID medical countermeasures. If you think back to the early weeks and months of the pandemic, we were relying entirely on our public health measures. So things like social distancing, mask use, hand hygiene, covering our coughs, those types of things. Those all remain important, even at this stage. But as you alluded to, thankfully, through science and our modern technology, we now have other tools that are equally, if not more useful in combating the pandemic. So since December of 2020, we've had vaccines available, and now we have in the United States 3 safe and highly effective vaccines for combating and preventing COVID infection and protecting the vulnerable members in our community through vaccination at the community level. And then now, whereas back in April of 2020, we had really nothing medication-wise to treat COVID. Now we have, a fairly significant number of medications that are available, both for people in the outpatient setting, so people with mild to moderate COVID symptoms, and also for people in the inpatient setting who have more serious illness. So I like to think of our of those three general categories of tools as like the three legs of a stool. Without one of them, the stool is going to not be very stable. But with all three of them, I think that we have a very real chance of stabilizing the pandemic moving into the coming months and certainly this calendar year.
Is it pretty standard procedure then if a patient is coming into a clinic or healthcare setting and they have a number of chronic illnesses, diabetes, and so forth, and they have contracted COVID? Is it pretty standard then to give them these medicines up front then to help them?
Certainly. So particularly for high risk persons such as those that you've mentioned, people with chronic illnesses like diabetes, early recognition of infection is very important, and then responding quickly with the various medications that are available to treat those higher risk folks especially is an important strategy for reducing the likelihood of serious illness, the kind of illness that results in hospitalization or even death. So for high-risk persons with mild to moderate COVID, there are a number of medication options that are available in the outpatient setting to reduce the risk of serious infection.
Let's switch to the vaccines now. And I think nationwide, there's still 30% or even a little more than 30% of folks who are not fully vaccinated. And that means there's 70% or so that are, which is, getting there. Why still get the vaccine after, say, we've seen all these Omicron variant infections, right? And I might have some natural immunity. Why should I still get the vaccine?
Well, the science is clear. Whether you have been infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the virus that causes COVID-19, and regardless of the variant and regardless of when you were infected, vaccination still protects you from future infection. And most importantly, it protects you from serious future infection. So, some of the studies during the Delta era, which was not too terribly long ago, showed that folks who were known to have been previously infected could reduce their risk of serious reinfection twofold by simply getting vaccinated. So vaccines remain, a critical part of our preventive efforts, even in the wake of the Omicron surge, and even in the, this 2 years into the pandemic, where a lot of people have been infected and reinfected. Vaccines are still a very important tool to preventing serious future infections.
What are you saying in terms of young children, right? That Pfizer vaccine has been available for children 5 and older for some time now. Nationwide, I don't know, beyond native populations, but nationwide, there's still a long way to go, right, with vaccinating children. What are you seeing with the interest and some of the questions that families have?
Sure. Well, let me first put it in perspective. So to date, over 2.1 million doses of COVID vaccines have been administered in the Indian Health Service at our federal, tribal, and urban facilities. We've had over 1 million people at IHS facilities receive at least one dose, over 850,000 who are fully vaccinated, and almost 250,000 booster doses have been administered. As you're probably aware, children ages 5 to 11, so school-age children became eligible for COVID vaccination back in late October of 2021. And since that time, IHS has been working to make sure that these safe and effective COVID vaccines are available throughout our system of care to school-age children. If we look at it in the broader context nationwide, over 9.3 million doses of COVID vaccine have been administered to children ages 5 to 11 years old. But that's only about 3.7% of this age group, and this age group makes up almost 9% of the US population. So partly because this age group is the most recent to become eligible, rates of vaccination are not as high as for other age groups, but they are increasing. And we know that children who are not fully vaccinated remain susceptible to infection, including serious infection. COVID vaccination is especially important in young children to reduce their risk of a condition known as multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, or MISC. And so there are a lot of reasons why parents of young children who have not yet been fully vaccinated should be considering taking their children to receive their vaccines. We know that these vaccines are safe in this age group. We know that they're effective in this age group. And really, I think it just boils down to, answering questions that parents and caregivers may have, and addressing any concerns that they may have. I mean, I can tell you my children are older, but I have 2 school-age children and 1 in college, and all 3 of them have been fully vaccinated. I believe very strongly in both the safety and effectiveness of these vaccines. So it continues to be a challenge, but a challenge that I think that we can meet, and we just have to do that one person at a time.
Yes, I've got kids just a little bit older than yours. Same with them. One's in college, and she had to be vaccinated to go back to college, right? And then tested, and lots of precautions that the institution was doing, and they also wanted to be vaccinated so that they could see their grandparents over the holidays, the winter holidays. So we didn't have that in 2020, so it was sure kind of a blessing, right, to be able to travel to see your grandparents who they love to see. And a lot of these young kids, right, in our community are living in multi-generation households with elders and grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles, right, who aren't so young anymore, and who have contracted a number of diseases, and the vaccine keeps all of them safer than they would be, is what you're saying. That's what I hear anyways. What about long COVID, doctor? It seems like there's more in the news about every couple weeks about what we're learning about long COVID, right? Every body is different. Every person is different and reacts differently to the symptoms. But what are we seeing that could happen to more people who get seriously ill?
Well, long COVID is an issue. So again, in terms of background, there are a lot of names for this. It's also known as post-COVID, long hauler syndrome. The medical terminology is post-acute sequelae of COVID infection, or PASC. And just so everyone understands, this is a condition where symptoms of COVID persist for 4 weeks or longer after initial infection, or when new symptoms develop 4 weeks or longer after infection. And this can even occur sometimes in folks who were not initially symptomatic with their infection. It can affect multiple body systems, including, just to name a few, the heart, the nervous system, the kidneys, the musculoskeletal system. And while the estimates vary, somewhere between 30 to 70% of people infected with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, which is the virus that causes COVID, may experience some degree of long COVID symptoms. As far as who is going to go on to develop long COVID, that's still being studied. There was a recent publication that identified 4 risk factors for developing long COVID. There may be others, but those 4 included having a high viral load during initial infection, the presence of certain autoantibodies. These are the types of antibodies that cause other conditions like rheumatoid arthritis or lupus. Reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus, which is the virus that causes mono, and which many of us were exposed to as adolescents and carry with us for a lifetime. And then a history of type 2 diabetes. So those four risk factors were recently identified as increasing the risk for long COVID symptoms. But I also want to point out there's a lot that we still don't know about long COVID, and there are certainly many studies that are ongoing. Right now, treatments, for instance, are largely supportive at this time. Maybe the day will come and we'll have specific treatments that target long COVID. But I will say this, we do know that the best way to prevent long COVID is to prevent SARS-CoV-2 infection in the first place. And the best way to do that is to make sure that you're up to date on your COVID vaccines.
Absolutely. I'm looking at a graphic here on my other screen, and that talked about just what you did with the 4 areas: the brain, low oxygen levels, right? Oxygen was such a challenge with severe symptoms, right? We remember lots of talk about the ventilators in the beginning and how doctors and practitioners have gotten better about treating people, right, to keep their oxygen levels high, but maybe that will lead to cognition problems. You know, we've heard people talk about foggy brain and so forth, right? Lungs, obviously, if you're having a hard time breathing, that might continue. You mentioned the circulatory system and the heart and vascular damage, and that could lead to fatigue, because a lot of people, right, have talked about just being exhausted. And then the immune system, as you mentioned, I mean, that's the crux of all of this. Well, Dr. Clark, is there anything you'd like to add as we wrap up this segment with you?
So I think the message that I would really like to get out there is that while we are 2 years into this pandemic, and while it's frustrating and we'd all like it to be over with, as I said before, I do think that there's hope. I do see a light at the end of the tunnel. I do think that we're moving in the right direction. But I think now is also a time that we need to remain vigilant and stay on our guard. And we need to use the tools that are available to us in order to continue to combat the virus until we get through the pandemic. And those tools include our public health measures, masking, social distancing, staying home when you're sick, getting tested if you're symptomatic or if you've been exposed. And then our medications, whether they're the antiviral medications or the monoclonal antibodies, for managing mild to moderate symptoms in the outpatient setting, as well as the medications we have available for people who are more seriously ill in the hospital. And then perhaps most importantly, that critical third set of tools we have, which is our 3 safe and highly effective COVID vaccines, not only to protect ourselves and to protect our children, but to protect our communities and especially the vulnerable members of our communities. If we could redouble our efforts on vaccination and ensure that everyone completes their primary series, that immunocompromised people get their extra dose, and that everyone who's eligible gets a booster dose, I think we could conquer this pandemic in short order. So that's the main message that I would want to get across.
Well, thank you, Dr. Clark, so much for your time, your service. Please thank the other members of your COVID vaccine task force, if you will, and stay safe, stay healthy, and stay warm as that winter just won't let go.
Thank you, sir. You too.
All right, take care.
Bye.
That's Dr. Matthew Clark, the Chief Medical Officer for the Alaska area of the Indian Health Service. This is a conversation. We can do this, Indian country. We can do this, Alaska Native villages, Anchorage, South Central, Southeast, Aleutians, we can do this. And you heard the three areas, right? The public health measures, the vaccines, and if you happen to get quite sick after having contracted COVID, there's a number now of medicines that can alleviate those symptoms and avoid serious complications. And unfortunately, that we've heard with more than 10,000 deaths in Alaska Native and American Indian communities since the onset of the pandemic. This is the We Can Do This Indian Country campaign, and I want to show you, play for you another little snippet, another message that was created for our Alaska Native and American Indian populations just to get the conversation going. So here's another sample, if you will, of the We Can Do This campaign.
From day one, we welcome our children into the home. When they feel the want and the love, they grow very strong. No matter what tribe you're from or where you live, we all know how important our children are to our cultures. Protecting them from severe illness, hospitalization, and even death from COVID means getting them vaccinated. Everyone 5 and older is eligible for a COVID vaccine.
We can do this. Go to vaccines.gov to find vaccines near you. Paid for by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services.
It's nice to see those ads pop up on my social media. I saw that young person with the drum on Native News Online earlier today. Now we're in for a treat, and I want to bring in our next presenter.
Oh,
What a treat! It's been a while. How are you?
I'm great. How are you, David? I forgot how soothing your voice was. It's really good to see you. Thank you. And thank you for the invitation.
Yes. Well, how's Heidelberg today? Is that you in your living room looking out over the water?
It is, and it's chilly today. We are having another little cold snap, and but it's beautiful. The light's coming back, and the days are getting longer. So I wanted to just really emphasize Dr. Clark's message, because as you know, David, you've visited Alaska, you've been out in the villages, you've been to different places. You realize the huge scope of our state. It's like so many different environments. I live in a rainforest. You were speaking to Dr. Clark, there's a whole different environment up there. And we vary from city to small towns to villages. And so it's really, really a different, but yet similar landscape to other people that are trying to say that, yes, we can do this Indian country, because we know how varied we are, but we're all in it together because some of our core values really focus in on our children, our elders, and I'm really glad you brought out some of the cultural aspects, because our elders who are now in their 90s, who, the few precious elders we have memories of those epidemics in the past. And the one missing factor was the services and the healthcare delivery. And so my hat goes off to IHS, to our health consortium in Anchorage for the outreach. They got on top of it. And the one thing I would say that is different now is that we do have science, we do have education, we have doctors, our own, as a matter of fact, which we need to acknowledge. And I don't have TV, as you know, David, but I get out in the world and I look around, and the messages that were being conveyed, the narrative that was being told to the nation about certain aspects of this horrible thing happening to us, this epidemic, was very mixed to me. I am a great believer in culture. I'm a great believer in science. I'm a great believer in medical help. In Indian country, as you know, in the past, we've had horrible delivery of service, and I'm just going to acknowledge that. Our death counts were very high for our babies, and lack of care was really the battle cry: get us more help. Well, this epidemic has proven to me that some of these systems that they put in place could be used effectively. If you could reach Heidelberg, Alaska, and I could get the first vaccine, I could get the second vaccine, I got the booster. Heck, if they had another one, I'd get another one. So that message had to go out because I was hearing things that were reacting to a national anti-vaccine whatever. And I do like to ask people, why do you believe that, or why do you think that? It's not based on facts, it's not based on science or any of our core values, that talk about protecting our community. I was just lost, and really it was really a narrative. And so when you say we can do this Indian country, that's my narrative, and I'm sticking to it. I didn't even introduce myself. I apologize for that.
Yeah, who
But
are you?
yeah, who the hell are you, lady? um, it's really we're practicing in our language class, in our immersion. I would be saying, David. I would introduce you, because in our
Mm,
cultural way, you don't get up and say, I'm Juice. That would be embarrassing. But sometimes we're putting these forums where we have to explain who we are. My name is Juice, and I am a member of the Yaklanas and Yakjanas. That's my clan. I'm a double fin killer whale, and I come from Heidelberg, Alaska. I am, on my mother's side, a Haida. My father is from Metlakatla, Alaska. He's a Simpson eagle. Um, and so I would have someone like David would acknowledge my family lines. I'd start with my mother, and I would explain that my name carries from my grandmother, Kailjus. My mother is Haida from Heidelberg, and her family lines I would explain. Then I would come to my dad's side, because I always honor my father. But I just wanted to put that out there, because we're learning now, as we reconnect with our cultural ideas and identity, some of the things are not always user friendly for our culture. So I just, it's not really great to get out there and say, here's me, Lisa from Heidelberg. And I would never say that I was a leader. I would not say that. I would say instead that I am someone who is very involved in my culture, because that's where I get my identity, my ideas of leadership, my ideas of how to strengthen our nation through my own Gwagon, through my clan. So that's kind of just I I am the executive director for the Hadas Kilquias Foundation, which is a language nonprofit created here locally in Heidelberg. Um, and it was identifying our cultural losses, our language, protocols, things that we were missing out on. And so we started a nonprofit, and this has been one of our best years this last year. And so I'm also a newly elected director for Sea Alaska, the regional corporation. And that is an honor to sit in that seat, because I can try to represent the region. Specifically, I am from Prince of Wales Island. So although I represent all shareholders, all 30,000 shareholders, I have a connection with and feeling for this southeast region. So
mm.
above all, I'm a nana, I'm a grandma, I'm a mom, I'm a proud Native woman, and I'm not going to be afraid to say that this is a time of deep mourning for the elders that we haven't been able to honor. We had, I think, 5 losses in Ketchikan, where we had moved elders to the only facility that they could be moved to, long-term care. I think it's called the Pioneer Home, and we had 5 deaths, and that's a lot for a village of 400. I mean, that was just back to back. And so I can't imagine what people are dealing with in Indian country, because it is ceremony. It is very, very important to us to pay our respects to those that have left us. So when we come away from this sadness and this time, I'm looking forward to not only honoring them, but to also letting them know that we as a tribe, as a nation, we've survived it. And that, like our ancestors, we can do it also, so yeah, I think about everybody outside of my community, because we got lost in the number of losses, but we can't lose hope, of course. And I think that the one thing that I'm willing to say out loud, because it really bothers me that we don't stand up for our elders, because I have talked people into getting vaccinated, and I've told them, number one, if they were aware of polio, and had they ever had a shot, and maybe they hadn't been around long enough, but the actual sickness of the disease doesn't go away. We get fooled into this security thing of it leaving us, but it doesn't, and it's part of this environment. So it's just like this one that's in front of us. It might get a ventilator type of it, or you might get the easy part that's coming down, because that was the argument I heard was, oh, it's nothing now. And I said, well, here's my argument. You may be spreading it to an elder who has a very low tolerance. You may be spreading it to a child who, if they should be infected, this sickness is brutal on them. So I don't believe you have the right to not protect those that we love. And so that's my story. And I'm also an attorney, so I like to have my arguments, but in my heart, I really believe that that's true, and that I am not a scientist. I pay deep respect to anyone who studies and understands sicknesses. I'm not a doctor, so I listen to well-respected people in that field, and they are experts in that field for a reason. And the reason is that we respect what they're telling us. So it's really good to see you, David.
Yes.
I was listening, and it was just amazing, and I'm glad I made it. I was away for a while, and I came back home. So today's a beautiful day to be sharing why we can do this, why Indian country can beat this, and why we must be united. When we're together, we're powerful. So let's do it. Let's
Well,
do it.
thank you so much. And I just love how you talked about your clans. I was more familiar with the Navajo protocols, right? And there's a lot of Dene Navajo people, right? So you tend to come across them quite a bit, introducing clans on all sides of their families. And I didn't. Sometimes it kind of just feels like, yeah, I do this because that's what we do, right? And I'm gonna tick them off, talk through the four clans, two on each maternal and paternal. But last summer I spent some time with doing one of my videos, and that's where I met you. Was doing a video on a leader, and this was a Dene woman who was a leader, and of course she talked about her clans, and everybody, right, that I talked to about her did the same thing, and they also talked about, she's a young she's a young leader, she's a young person, and it wasn't until I realized who her parents were that I'm like, oh, that's why she's so powerful, right? And
Mhm.
so to see that in action, and to see your involvement in the community in action, I mean, that's what it's all about, right?
Mhm.
And then to be able to make those connections to ancestors who did the same thing, and
Yep.
and that's how people know you, right?
Yep. 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 That's true. It's a small world too. Indian country, it is a very small world depending on what you're involved in. There's a crew of people, um, Native attorneys, for example. It depends on your generation where you got involved, but it's not that big of a world. And it's the same with the cultural. It's the same with the language. People who are involved, and I see it. I see it as the true road to empowerment, the true return to our real selves, and the incredible, through the language you can learn the incredible power um, of your ancestors, and the our language is 14,000 years old. You learn one word and you're learning more history than anybody, you know, and the more you learn, hopefully the more you'll have to pass down to those next babies. And David, you bring up a really good point. We're doing a naming for our Guigon in May, and we're doing it a little different because of this sickness, this COVID. And it's really about bringing back the power of our names and the names connection to the land and the property rights of the names. And so being brave enough and being bold enough to say, this is who I am. I'm not a person that exists in a book. This is the real deal. It is very empowering. And I'm hoping that when my grandchildren have grandchildren, that they will have immediate connection instead of this. We have gaps in our knowledge because of our history. I want them to be on solid foundation. That's what I'm building. And I know there's others out there in Indian country that are doing the same thing. And I'm very proud of them because the rewards are not this everyday economic scene that we're taught. It's so invaluable. It is so powerful. And I've seen it in action. Some of the scientists, the people that I'm surrounded by, always want to find their way back home, always through whatever education. So, yeah.
What has the practical impact of the pandemic been? I mean, I'm sure you stayed at home as much as you could at the beginning. I know the ferry service was impacted for different reasons because you all are on the Prince of Wales Island, as you mentioned, and you're really the most southern right part of the state of Alaska's
Yep.
borders, if that matters. It doesn't matter to everyone that I know on your island, but
Yeah.
you're way down south and not too far from where the road would come in from Prince Rupert if we were driving to canoe to you. But what's island life been like in the pandemic?
It went from a fear-based, just everybody didn't know what was coming. And I think when you're in a lot of trauma, that just magnifies everything. And I think that with and it kind of smoothed over to, oh, everything's okay now. Things are getting better. And then we went into round 2. And so it just extended out. And then it depends on what you're doing, but it did impact our economy. The grocery prices are out of this world right now. I mean, I recently, the closest grocery is like 50 miles from here. And then Ketchikan would be the next, you'd have to fly or go by ferry to Ketchikan. And the prices were super high in Ketchikan, but noticeably higher over here on Prince of Wales. And so it's impacted that. The state of Alaska itself is going through some crazy stuff, with the oil prices dropping. There's a correlation between that and their budget. And so statewide, we weren't getting a lot of services. And the number one thing that was impacted was our ferry services, because we have a marine highway. That's what it's called. And we don't have roads to different places. And so the state doesn't view it that way. But now I think there is some slight change because we had some money come down and they were able to move it into helping that ferry system through the state temporarily provide more services. And those are to all rural communities, so to get to the hubs. And so, yeah, it impacted everything, the price of everything. Yeah. So I think it's been hard. There's been a lot of COVID relief dollars, but those are chunks of change that come in, and there's things that we need. We're always going to need, and everybody's going to come through that recovery. So yeah, there was a big impact, big impact. And I think a lot of it too was knowing what to do when there's a death, because some people respected it and held off, and others went right ahead. And I know everyone in the country had to deal with that. And that was tough because we are taught a certain way to behave, a certain thing, do certain stuff. And if you're not from our culture or you're not from our areas, you don't understand that. It's a very different concept in a non-Indigenous world. And that's okay. It's just different. COVID hit us 100 times harder. And I think we're going to have to, like I said, when this is over, I know that our Guigan will probably pay homage, our clan will pay homage to those that have left us, but we're not going to stay in that place. We are going to continue on and be grateful and be thankful and be happy that, what can we do to get stronger? I think that's a message that I would say, not only can we do this now, but we're going to use this to make us stronger in the future.
Mm. Wow.
Mhm.
You're one busy person. I don't know.
No, I'm not. I love to stay busy because you're only gifted so many hours in a day. Spirit gives you so much to do. And when you finally get to a healing, really great place, it is rejuvenating. There's so much to do. And we're so fortunate we're here, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Thanks to our ancestors. Yeah.
Well, it's fun to see you be Nana Grandma on Facebook. How many are you taking care of now?
I have, I have a lot of kids that I've raised that were not my children.
Mm-hmm.
And so I gave birth to 2 children. And so far my babies, my daughter, Verlaine, she has 1 son and that's it. I got in trouble for asking her when's the next one, and she's like, that's it. And he's graduating in June. Ariane's graduating. And my other granddaughter was born. She's 2 years old in Washington. I'm so in love. We're so nuts in love with her. We're all going to move to Bellingham. So no. But I also have other grandchildren. I have Corinne. I have a girl named Anne that lives in Anchorage, and she's got 3 children. And so 2 of them were actually culturally adopted when she lived with me, but then she's had another child. And so I have 3, 4, 5. Yay.
Well,
Yay me.
that one in Bellingham, her hair is so black too. It's just
I know.
she's got
Her
an interest.
parents are like really mellow as jello. They're very laid back. She's a force. She's like, oh, I'm number 1 Nana. And I'm like, yes, you are. she's going to be our firecracker.
Well, I wonder where she'll get that from.
I don't know.
Well, good luck with your naming. That sounds so special.
It is.
And
Thank
maybe
you.
we'll watch it on Facebook Live. Somebody can hold up the iPad and show us if some of it's viewable.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but you'll be there in spirit. And like I always tell everybody who I love dearly, Ginlaf Ista, David, keep doing good things because that's just who you are.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You came in crystal clear. You look great. So
Thank you.
make some tea.
Okay. Thanks for having me as a guest. I appreciate it. And keep doing good work.
Bye-bye. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Well, that was nice to check in with Heidelberg, Alaska, the southernmost part of the string from southeast Alaska. When you look at Alaska, right, and you overlay the whole map on the lower 48, and if you put the North Slope at the North Dakota, Minnesota, the top of Indian country, and the lower 48, at least in the United States, can't the rest of Alaska, the Aleutians go all the way down from Minnesota, North Dakota, down to Arizona, right? So that's how far the Aleutians string out, and then the southeast part would go down towards the middle part of the country, Kentucky or so. Just a giant state, as Lisa Lang pointed out, and everyone's different, right? The North Slope, Bethel, you name the village hub, South Central, the whole central Athabascan region, and the only way in, right, is right now when the roads are frozen, or otherwise it's a plane ride. so quite a giant, beautiful state, and very, very different. This is a conversation about the COVID pandemic in Indian country, especially in our Alaska Native communities, and really enjoyed Lisa's commentary from Heidelberg. And we're going to turn to another speaker uh, right now. And I've also been very honored to know Cody EU Kapadik. And Cody, thanks so much for joining us. Uh, Tell us about your UPIC background and anything else you want to tell about your. Are you on caffeine these days? I know you've been on and off coffee. What's the latest with you?
Thanks, David. I drink 1 cup typically in the morning, and then some kombucha tea, get that probiotic, and then maybe some green tea, but definitely not what it used to be. Trying to limit some of that. But waka winga did not kayu kamakacholak Oksugnagley, Bristol Bay, Alaska, Okmingunga. So I'm Cody Kapadik. I'm UPIC from Bristol Bay. Portage Creek Village is Oksugnagley, Bristol Bay, Southwest Alaska. And yeah, we're all UPIC, and and I've heard and seen a lot of Alaska Native and Indigenous similarity, but like a lot of those UPIC or Yuk means real person or real people, and I've heard a lot of that in different Indigenous communities. So I really like that.
Mm. And tell us about your name. I know we call you Cody because it's easier to pronounce, but you're using your traditional name.
Yeah, more back on Cody is fine, but I like to hear my UPIC name EU. Doesn't have a definition meaning. It was just something that my uppa or grandpa gave gave me as a UPIC name. I guess from what my family knows, because I used to eat a lot when I was a baby, which meant cry so hard that I passed out. And I think that's because I had some big tonsils, and So, but yeah, it was just whenever anybody would call me Cody, he said not Cody EU. He was just very adamant, and he wouldn't call me anything else.
Well, it's good to see and hear you. How has the pandemic treated you and your family and community?
It's been definitely difficult at times, like it has been for many, I'm sure. A good amount of my family, has had it. Some of them twice now. One in the beginning, early on before vaccines were available. I know a few of us had it, and then my grandma actually passed away from pneumonia after having it. Looked like she was going to beat it all, but then that just, I think, took her over the top. But she was almost 90, so she lived a long, good life. But it was definitely difficult.
Sorry about that. You've also, when did you finish your master's degree studies? Was that in December or
I just finished in December. Finished with a master's in project management and got my bachelor's in civil engineering. And that's my position as a civil engineer for one of the government agencies.
How did were you in person for a lot of your classes, or did it go all virtual as you've worked on your grad?
Finishing up my last semester of undergrad, we went full virtual, and then they're trying to do some in person as well. I'm still opting for the virtual when I can, especially because the graduate courses that I'm in now, since I'm applying for engineering PhD next, just because why not? Their classes are typically in the evening, and I even in some of my finishing up my undergrad courses, I told my friends that I'll be in my comfy clothes and fuzzy slippers and ready for bed when class gets out, rather than leaving campus at 8 or 9 p.m. And I see you said in the chat that Bristol Bay, yeah, Dillingham is in Bristol Bay. Bristol Bay is the region. Dillingham is the city I was born in.
Okay, so I wasn't wrong. I knew there was a Dillingham connection, but I know Bristol Bay is pretty
Yeah.
big.
Yeah.
What what's it like between living in Anchorage and then those times you do get back to Bristol Bay? I mean, how's the pandemic been different or the same in those two different places?
So Anchorage, you've got it's the major hub for the state. You got the ports and the major international airport. So um, I remember, gas prices were the lowest I'd seen in years for a little while, and then now they're back up to normal again. And then the panic buying at all the stores, shelves were cleared. All the different memes about the toilet paper and everything. We went through it all. But for Dillingham and other rural communities, uh, they don't have any. They're not connected to the road system at all. So everything gets shipped in by the barge or the airplane. Um, and yeah, in Dillingham, there are actually no stoplights. It's all stop signs.
And Anchorage is pretty much like any, I don't know. It feels very vibrant because there's so much diversity, and yet at the same time kind of conservative too, because a lot of people who've moved to Alaska, right, are lift you up by your bootstraps type folks, and they don't want to be bothered with too many rules imposed by outsiders or whatever the mindset is, right? So it's a kind of a balance, yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely a plethora of all kinds of people here. But yeah, it's definitely more of an urban setting. We have the streetlights here, Costco, everything, and all the major hotel stores. Is where most of the industry jobs are.
What's your winter been like?
A lot of working from home and classes from home, and so it's just spent a lot of time behind a couple monitors and trying to keep up to go outside once in a while and do some exercises, or try not to outgrow some of my other clothes that are not pandemic stretchy pants.
Right. Is it pretty common or do you see masks in stores anymore, or does it just vary by the store?
It varies. You'll still see people wearing some are wearing them. You'll see people not. There are some stores, some places require them, some places highly recommend them, but we all know how that can go. And then I've also just noticed that they're wearing them and just not maybe wearing them so correctly, like with the under or not covering the nose or even down in their chin. It's like they're wearing them as the requirement, but they're not really effective. So it's just interesting to see.
Is it different in Dillingham? Are people a little more focused or similar?
Still has the same, just like anywhere, you've got all kinds of differing perspectives and opinions and frustrations with, you know, uh, trying to work with some of the guidance that's been put out, and then other people who are just, you know, don't really want that imposed on them, I guess.
So tell us a little bit about Bristol Bay. What is the plane ride over from Anchorage to Dillingham? What, 45 minutes, an
Yeah,
hour maybe?
maybe just under an hour. You feel at least in a small jet, you pretty much get up there and then you're in the air for a few minutes, and then it feels like you're already going back down. It feels like you spend more time taxiing on the runway.
Hmm. And then how many small villages then are accessible by road from Dillingham? What's it like?
No, none accessed by road. Again, you'd have to hop on another small propeller bush plane to go to some of the other neighboring villages, or summertime you go up and down the river to some of them. Wintertime you wait till the rivers are frozen over enough to carry a snow machine, or we call a snow machine. People look at me funny, and there's that, I guess, the more commonly known term is a snowmobile. It just sounds funny to say. For a lot of Alaska people, we say snow machine. Don't know how many villages, but it's just Dillingham is definitely the hub of Bristol Bay, just like kind of like Bethel is for that region.
Well, maybe when you get more stoplights, you can start calling them snowmobiles. Hey, stick with me, Cody. Just to give people a little more flavor of the different 200 plus tribal communities in Alaska. Recently, the state of Alaska's chief medical officer, Dr. Ann Zink, was on a Washington Post conversation, and she talked a little bit about the cooperation and the emphasis of the Alaska Native communities with the pandemic. So let's listen. It's a couple minutes of Dr. Ann Zink, chief medical officer of state of Alaska, and Cody will come back to you.
Okay.
Yeah, honestly, I cannot think of a better partner during this pandemic than our tribes. We have 226 independent sovereign tribes in the state of Alaska, and their leadership, their partnership, their history, the fact that they were really decimated by the 1918 pandemic, and every pandemic and epidemic that has come through this world that we have documented has unfortunately disproportionately impacted Alaska Native people. That oral history played a huge role in the way that we were able to respond to and continue to respond to this pandemic on a regular basis. So, for example, early on, testing was coming in via different resources. We were manufacturing our own testing, and we found that if we were able to get communities the resources they needed, they were able to really mitigate and control the pandemic in new and unique ways. They were able to identify cases early. They were able to do housing and quarantine. If you look at our vaccine rates, they're actually highest amongst our communities that have the highest rate of Alaska Native people. Our Eastern Aleutian tribes is greater than 90% right now vaccinated in that region. And we built every aspect of our response in partnership with our tribes. So, for example, our vaccine task force at every single level had a tribal partner as well as a state partner so that we could really see what the other one was doing and be able to move forward. And a lot of our success, we led the nation for about a month, and then most people vaccinated per capita was because of the incredible ingenuity of our tribal health partners who are getting vaccine out by dog sled to elders in their house, or man baskets between fishing vessels, or snow machines on airplanes that were moving back and forth. They know their community. They know how to share information. They know what is a priority. And I love being on meetings with whaling captains where they're the ones who are leading the meeting, and I am just there to share the information about COVID, and they can make it apply to their community. So I really think we all need to lean into those trusted leaders in our community. What that looks like in New Jersey versus Upiyavik are very different. But regardless, be it a church leader or a whaling captain, these are our leaders in our communities that we need to continue to partner with to make sure that we're all thinking about the health and well-being of our communities.
Snow machine.
Yeah.
She's a local.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, even Dr. Ann Zink knows what's up.
Cody, how do you think we keep staying vigilant? Earlier we heard from Dr. Clark from the Indian Health Service Alaska area, and he wanted just to stay. Don't let your guard down. How do we do that? I mean, you're a younger person. I'm sure some of your friends kind of have that. Oh, I'm fine. I'm healthy. I'm not worried about that. How do we keep on keeping on for the vulnerable people in our lives?
Yeah, and I think that's just what I try to keep in my perspective, and for the people who think similarly, that I mentioned that I lost my grandmother because of it, and then that was early on, and then even just last month, I believe, one of my aunts lost her grandson, and so it's that's just, I feel like there's a lot of that whole thing, you don't really I don't know how exactly it goes, but when it hits closer to home, then I think people might reconsider and take it a little bit more seriously. And so I just kind of keep that in my mind of, yeah, it's definitely, hit close to home for me a couple times. and it's not just the elderly or the compromised, those with compromised immune systems, but even the younger people are, we're seeing that as well. But it's just having that selflessness of, doing our part to try to do the if vaccines, if people are willing, and then masking up. It's just, I don't think it's going going away anytime soon. So gotta keep trying to work with what we know and listen to the scientists, doctors who know more as the guidance comes and they learn more.
I know too that thank you for those reflections, and yeah, it'd be terrible to lose a grandparent during this time, which everything's so so up in the air, and a lot of stress just living, and then to have to go through that as well. I know you, through your studies and your interest in engineering and science, that you've been very involved with the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, in addition to what you do up there in Anchorage. And you've become quite close to the ASIS, the Society's Council of Elders. What what have they been talking about in terms of the pandemic? I know that the national conference 2 years ago didn't happen because of COVID, like a lot of people, right? Canceled anything in person, and so it was virtual. We kind of had a hybrid conference last year, and it's still feeling a little uneasy, maybe getting better. But you tell me, what are the elders talking about?
Yeah, there was only a few elders that came to the most recent national conference in person, and you're right. I'm now one of the few elder helpers who goes and assists with getting them to and from airport, or helping them with whatever they need getting to the sessions. And um, and I remember hearing from the staff that all of um, the student representatives, that was one of the first things that they said, that the elders aren't coming, right? Tell them that we love them, but we want them to be safe. And they were all considering that too, with their being older, and respective of any health issues if they have them. And so I think ACES did a great job of accommodating everybody and their concerns and needs, and it just moving forward with all the precautions that we can, risk management. That's part of the whole project management stuff, and it's just hopefully we can, and we were believe we were successful with the previous in-person conference. It's just a matter of um, working with what you got, and being flexible, I guess.
Are their spirits good? I mean, how are they at home, and what anything, any wisdom that you remember hearing, or
Yeah, just like anybody, they're human. They're just a little bit older humans, um, but they're I love anytime I get on a call with them or meeting. It's just their conversations definitely don't. They sound very lively and young, and it's always fun to hear and laugh. So I think they're doing pretty well. I mean, just like anybody, I'm sure they've got their own worries, stresses, fatigues, but just like anybody, they're going through it the best they can.
yeah? Um, thank you for connecting us to them. And what are you most excited about in your studies? I know you talked about going on to the PhD level and working, I'm sure, on the with a lot of your day taking up by work and other responsibilities. What excites you about the next level of your studies?
Um, I don't know if excite would be the right word. It's definitely going to be some time and energy to work. I like to say I don't really, maybe I don't like myself that well because I don't give myself much time of a social life. I just like to put more on the plate. Um, but no, more seriously, the uh, I figured it was I got into a program that would fund it, so I figured why not? It can only help and serve me better in what I can do. Um, but also part of the reasons why I'm wanting to do that is I learned from one of my professors that she's one of 3 Alaska Natives with an engineering PhD, and I just thought that was not enough. So I figured I'd go join and find a topic that I enjoyed and want to learn more about, and I think it's going to work out pretty well with the geotechnical aspect, with the participle, and then dealing with permafrost, climate change, and rural Alaska. And those are all areas that I come from rural Alaska, remote areas, and climate change affecting some of the rural villages are, one of the first impacted. So it's definitely meaningful.
We've seen some of the stories of communities too close to the river, and the rivers are starting to get more hard to anticipate, where that flow is going to go, or if they're flooding, right? I forget where that school was that they've basically condemned, all right, because the school was so close to the rising riverbanks. And you mentioned permafrost, everything's kind of on this layer of land, right? It's really not stable, right? And that's getting worse with things thawing out, so to speak, right?
Yeah, permafrost, in the name, it's supposed to be permanently frozen, but it's with climate change, not so much. So one of the ideas I think is looking to see how we can get some of the warmer air or warmer stuff away from the permafrost. So I thought that was interesting. So I might look into that. But yeah, that coastal erosion, everything, and I've heard some of them comments or people talking about why do they live there? Why don't they just up and move? And it's not easy to move a whole community, and that's where you've known and lived your whole life, and then back and even more historical, like a lot of these communities weren't even established by our people. It was like when you wanted school, you had to stay in one spot. When we were a little bit more nomadic people earlier, some of these were fish camps, and then they said if you want the school funded, you got to stay in one spot. So it's just interesting how a lot of the outsider views kind of try to recommend or dictate some of what we should do.
Interesting. What I had a question there, and it just left me. What's your transition like from winter? I mean, you look outside in Anchorage and you still got snow, and snow won't melt because it's sort of gotten just hard on the roadsides. And when does spring really come, and then what happens?
Well, right now we're in this weird spot. I know people do a lot of memes about it, but it's like full spring where things are melting, and then in like a day or two it'll change back to everything's frozen and snowing again. So yeah, right now it's a lot of puddles, ice. Some of the roads are dry, but then like right now I think it's above 40 degrees outside, and school is actually closed. It's 45 degrees, and like the university campus is closed for some of that road safety. And then yeah, it's just wondering if this is going to continue or if it's going to freeze up and snow again like it does.
Well, we appreciate your time. Any final words as we start to wind up this conversation? Thanks so much for joining us and spur of the moment.
Yeah, I just like to say trying to keep an open mind, open perspective, be considerate. And I know there's a lot of people with differing views, opinions, or whatnot, but I just try to be a decent human being. That's my big goal.
Well, that makes you pretty unusual based on my experience. But Cody, thank you so much for your example and your hard work. Like Dr. Kapotic, that sounds got a nice ring to it.
Yeah.
What, 4 years, 5 years?
Probably 4 or 5, yeah.
Well, it's going to be almost close to 2030. So come on, speed it up. You gotta go save the planet sooner than that.
I'll work on it.
All right. Thanks. Take care. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk again to you soon.
All right, fair enough. Thank you very much, David.
All right. Bye bye. All right. EU Kapatik, a engineering bachelor's student, project management master's student, and then he wants to study PhD engineering as a future doctorate. He said that only three Alaska Natives with PhDs in engineering. So he's going to join a select company one day, balancing responsibilities and work, right? Not just going to school with nothing else to do in your life. So thanks so much, EU, for taking some time and joining us. This has been a great conversation, touching base with our relatives and friends in Alaska. How's the COVID-19 pandemic been? A lot of COVID fatigue, a lot of loss, but looking forward to spring. In Heidelberg, they're going to do a group naming of people, right? Because our names are so important. Even our settler colonized names, right? They're who we are, but many folks are lucky to have a traditional name and family names and clan names. And that is your tie to not only your ancestors and your living family, right? But to the land and to what that clan is responsible for, and what your commitments and purpose, right, are all about. So thank you for these stories from Alaska. This has been a great conversation. We Can Do This Indian Country. For more information, wecandothis.hhs.gov. There's resources there targeted at Alaska Natives and American Indian populations. wecandothis.hhs.gov. And anything you want to know about the vaccines that Dr. Clark mentioned, Pfizer, Moderna, and J&J, and where we stand on boosters. Everyone needs the first shot and a booster, and that means you're fully vaccinated. And as of now, that booster is all right now that's been recommended, one booster, and that's the current status. So if you've been boosted, you're good. I would say the young people would tell us to hydrate and eat more green vegetables, and work on our other parts of our life, right? So we can be healthier and walk and exercise a lot more. But this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thanks again to the Department of Health and Human Services, the Indian Health Service, G&G Advertising, and Native Roots Radio, and for all of you for tuning in. We will see you down the road with more of these conversations. And for now, David Cournoyer, stay safe, save well. See you next time.
Hey, Through song we pray, through dance we think of our loved ones. We wish for good health and happiness. May we live in peace and harmony.